Nice short one now, just looking at some of the embryonic membranes and the beginning of our dive into the placenta. So when we look at a developing embryo, this is after that period of development where we have our 3 embryonic germ cell layers. They've gone through a period of folding. We end up with the beginning of our embryo. And so what we'll do now is we'll label the diagram from your booklets and we'll fill in some of the blanks here. So the outermost layer of protecting the embryo and what goes into develop into the placenta is known as the chorion. Now, I'm going to jump down to the bottom on the left-hand side now to highlight that this chorion extends around these blood vessels, these finger-like projections into the endometrium, and these finger-like projections are known as chorionic villi. Now, following on from the chorion, there's the chorionic cavity, which is a simple space in between the chorion and the next layer. Now, this next layer is known as the amnion. And the amnion is what houses, over on the right-hand side now, the amniotic fluid. Now, the amniotic fluid is mostly just the urine and the waste of the developing embryo and fetus itself. Now, back on the left-hand side, we can see this small yellow structure inside the embryo, or not inside the embryo, inside the chorion itself, and this is known as the yolk sac. The final thing that we need to be able to identify, I've begun sort of circling it in red here in the middle, is the umbilical cord. And this is the way that the developing embryo and fetus can then connect to the placenta and receive nutrients, receive lots of valuable things from the mother. So, amniotic fluid and the amnion. So, the amniotic fluid itself is a fluid, right? Mostly made up of that waste component released by the developing fetus. And it itself is mostly, before the fetus is developed fully, secreted by the amniotic membrane. Now, its job is, number one, to act as a bit of a shock absorber to protect the fetus from physical injury. It also helps to maintain a constant temperature for the developing fetus. And finally, it allows for free movement. Now, the amnion itself ruptures just before birth in the second stage of labour, and it releases the amniotic fluid in an event that you probably have heard of known as breaking the waters or the waters breaking. Now, the chorionic membrane. The chorionic membrane itself is formed from those outer cells of the blastocyst known as the trophoblast from our prior lessons. And that trophoblast in conjunction with mesoderm. Now, why mesoderm? Well, mesoderm is what is going to eventually develop the circulatory component or the blood-based component for this developing chorionic system and chorionic villi. Now, the chorion itself is what surrounds the embryo and the other membranes found within, and as the amnion enlarges, it fuses with the chorion. Now, that chorion is what will eventually develop into the placenta, but it takes about 8 to 12 weeks or 3 months for the placenta to completely form. So when we're talking about some other key structures that we identified right at the beginning, I'm not sure why this diagram isn't working so much, but we also have the yolk sac and the allantois. Okay, so the key part for today, the placenta. Now, the placenta is an organ, and it is an organ that forms from both the fetal and the maternal tissues, and it occurs during that first 8 to 12 weeks. The placenta has a number of key jobs. It has 5 real important jobs, but 3 of the main ones would be the supply of nutrients to the fetus, the removal of wastes from the fetus, and also serving as a hormonal supply for the developing fetus. So when we look at what those 5 functions were, there we go, popped in. Firstly, endocrine, so that hormonal supply to the fetus, and also to the mother to help the development. Number 2, excretory, so getting rid of waste products. Number 3, immune, so provision of antibodies from the mother to the developing fetus. In terms of nutrition, well, without each of these 5 things, it's going to be impossible for that fetus to grow and mature. And lastly, in terms of the respiratory component, the fetus gets its oxygen supply from the mother. It also removes its carbon dioxide supply via the umbilical cord to the placenta as well.